Hello, good evening to all listeners. First of all, we would like to thank once again the Radio Koradi team, especially Elio and his family, and also Erin for her availability in giving us this opportunity to share the Gnostic teaching. We are the missionaries of the new Gnostic Academy Samael Aun Weor in Florence and Siena in Italy. You can also find us online with this name both on our blog and YouTube channel. Today we are going to present the second part of our talk, Current Deviations from the Gnostic Practice and Doctrine. Lastly, we inform you that it is possible to ask questions anytime during or after this talk.
Ora lascio la parola a mio marito Gonzalo Garcia.
Now,
Grazie.
I will leave the word to my husband, Gonzalo Garcia.
Bene, anche da parte mia, grazie alla squadra del Radio Koradi.
Thank you. I would also like to thank all the Radio Koradi team, especially Elio and also Erin, who is in charge of the English radio and the technical part. And thanks also to all the listeners that are with us today. So we are doing this second part of this topic, and we will now see the first point. I have thought today about 3 points. We will have a 40-45 minute talk, then we will have a pause, also so that we don't get tired, a musical pause, about 5-10 minutes. And then I think that with another 40 minutes, we can have a second talk, and that will be enough for us today. So the first point I want to talk about is concerning the topic of alcohol and spirits. So I've heard all kinds of things in Gnosis concerning this point, especially Gnostic brothers who say things like we shouldn't be too extreme or we shouldn't be fanatics. These kind of phrases or sentences, I say, they are just justifications of the ego in order to satisfy its own desires. Phrases like, it doesn't matter if you drink a glass at a party or at a wedding or at New Year, it's just a toast, etc., etc. So we will now see what even just a glass of this poison does, in the words of Master Samael. I've heard things like we should be able to relate to other people as Gnostics, we should be able to mix with others so that others don't see us like strange people. Well, I can say that, first of all, we are not obliged to explain things to anybody. But if anybody asks us directly, then yes, we can say many things. We can say many things, for example, that we don't drink alcohol for health reasons, because my doctor told me not to drink, or because I meditate and drinking alcohol makes meditation difficult, and so on. So we can say many things, even without necessarily putting Gnosis in the discussion. I've also heard the excuse on behalf of certain missionaries that if a missionary arrives to another country or a city where drinking alcohol is very radicated in one's culture, then we should be able to adapt to that culture or to that nation or to that city or whatever. Well, this is dealing with the devil, is coming to pacts with the devil. And this is how we are calling this conference. This is exactly deviating Gnosis in order to adapt Gnosis to the ego. Shouldn't it be necessary to do the contrary? That is, that people, if they want, it should be them that adapt to the eternal principles of an initiatic tradition. Shouldn't this be the right thing? Shouldn't we adapt to Gnosis rather than adapting Gnosis to ourselves? We have done missions in many parts of the world where, for example, there's a whole culture around wine. And we have done many missions, and also our current mission. We could speak about our current mission in Florence or Siena. And we are exactly in a place that is known for the Chianti, is known as the Chianti region. It's a whole area where people, even from outside Italy, come just to taste the wine, the local wine. It's a very famous region for wine, the Chianti region in which we are now. So what should I do? I should drink this wine like many others in order to adapt? Shouldn't I say anything to the students because they don't understand, or because the thing is very radicated in their culture, because it's the habit of the inhabitants of this region? Or rather, should I teach instead Gnosis for who wants to regenerate themselves? Which is the correct task of a teacher, of a Gnostic missionary? I've also heard things like, Master Samael has never said that we shouldn't drink. Well, this simply indicates ignorance and lack of knowledge of the Gnostic teaching of Master Samael, as we will shortly see, because I will read certain texts very, very clear from Master Samael. So, infinite excuses. I could conclude, somebody also told me, I have known disciples, I have known direct disciples of Master Samael who personally told me that I saw Master Samael drinking in some kind of celebration. Or I saw him making a toast and things like this. So to these people or brothers, I say that I don't care what a disciple of Master Samael says. I care about what Master Samael says in the first place. And to those that say that they've seen Master Samael drink, I can say that this was only in the first couple of years of his life, and he was told off because of this. It was a vice he had to change, just as he had to change many other bad habits and change many other things of his own ego. So this would also be my reply to all these excuses and justifications that the intellect or the personality or the ego always comes up with. So I'm now going to read what Master Samael says in a book called Mystery of the Golden Blossom, which you all know, which is actually a Christmas message. So people or Gnostics should know that the Christmas messages, as Master Samael would call them, is a superior type of message, a superior book to other books. And this precisely is a Christmas message from year 71-72. So we're talking about a book where Master Samael was already in the final part of his own initiatic process. I will only read a couple of parts. Who wants can read the remaining chapter. It's chapter 18, which has the title of The Demon Alcohol. So just by reading certain parts, you will see that is quite clear and sufficient. So I will start reading and I will then make a comment to this chapter, to this text by Master Samael. So Master Samael says, "There is no need to discuss the effects of alcohol at length. Its name in Arabic, the same star, which represents the head of Medusa cut off by Perseus, simply means the demon. So my comment here is that it's actually a demon, it's a malefic spirit. So the word algol derives from the Arabic al-gol, which means, as Master Samael, means demon. So not only has this meaning, but it actually is saying that inside that substance, inside the substance of alcohol, there actually is a demon. So it's not just a beverage, alcohol, it's the residence of a demon. It's atomically involuted. So it's actually quite a powerful demon as well. Master Samael continues saying, unquestionably, alcohol has a vibratory tendency to disintegrate, dissolve, and destroy, being a product of destruction, which also originates in our organism and which is eliminated through the skin. So, I say it's perfect for psychological disintegration and disgregation, of course, that nurtures the multiplicity of the ego. Master Samael continues, with words of fire in the Book of All Mysteries, it is written that with alcohol, demons resuscitate already dead egos, those abominable, brutal, and bestial creatures which personify our psychological errors. So this is very strong. This should be quite sufficient, in my opinion. If a serious Gnostic is dedicating himself or herself to the work with the three factors, in this case, one of the three, which is death of the ego, and considering the hard work that it costs, if he manages to die in the ego with the help of the Divine Mother, so how stupid would that be then to drink a diabolic substance like alcohol, which people consider something very light or something fun or something that it's not so bad. So imagine that for something so stupid and apparently superficial, one of the eyes that cost you a lot of hard work to eliminate is going to resuscitate. So in this way, the path becomes very, very long, infinite, or impossible. So it would be very stupid to be tricked in this way by an ego. That is, I am dying in the ego, and then I drink and I resuscitate the ego. That's completely insane. So obviously many Gnostics know this text, this chapter by Master Samael. It's been many years that we meditate on these kind of books and chapters. So we should also comprehend what Master Samael says, the reality that drinking alcoholic beverages or spirits simply resuscitate the ego. So a way to understand this comprehension we can arrive to in order to understand this better is, for example, the fact that drinking on a psychological level connects you to moments of binge, moments of partying, or moments in one had in the past been part of parties, of drunken situations, of clubbing, night clubbing, moments in one would go out dancing and seeking to fornicate, seeking to pull or to pick up a girl or a boy, or these kind of moments that many people, and including many Gnostics, of course, had when they were younger. So moments that we call of evasion, but it's an evasion without the being. So obviously, if there is no being, what am I nurturing with that kind of evasion? I'm nurturing the ego, the personality, or the intellect. So as we say, drinking is also in order to forget exactly the contrary of what Gnosis is about. We drink in order to forget about the being, about Gnosis. And what exactly do we propose in Gnosis? What exactly do we want in Gnosis? We want to make consciousness of ourselves. We want to awaken consciousness in order not to forget ourselves. But by drinking, what we do is exactly the contrary. So we can now understand why Master Samael says that drinking resuscitates the ego. Because drinking in itself, it's a kind of search for the sensations that gave birth to the ego in the first place. So maybe we might assume, or we might think that a Gnostic that continues to occasionally drink because of a different comprehension he has, or because of a Gnostic moral that he has, we might argue that obviously when a Gnostic drinks, he doesn't drink in situations like the ones that we've just mentioned, that is, situations of binge, or situations of partying or clubbing, or going to the discotheque, or seeking to fornicate with someone, and so on. So obviously it's a different environment, it's a different level, but those egos, those very same egos that could be death at a level, they are still alive in other levels of the unconscious. As we know in Gnosis, the ego has 49 levels. So even if, physically speaking, onto a physical level, I don't hang out into those kind of environments anymore, I don't go out clubbing anymore, or in those drunken situations, but the thing is that those egos still reactivate themselves because they remember what they used to do. They remember where they were born. So, as I said, it's a search for those sensations. It's like a memory that resuscitates itself. So not only by drinking I nurture those egos, not only by drinking those egos keep and maintain themselves alive in the deep levels of the psyche, but they also emerge again onto the more superficial levels of the psyche. That is, they resuscitate, how Master Samael says. So I think that this can be enough as an example in order to explain better what we've just said and what Master Samael means when he says that drinking even little drops resuscitates the ego. So chapter 18 continues, and Master Samael continues saying, "It is manifestly clear that alcohol tends to eliminate the capacity for independent thought and calm judgment, since it fatally stimulates fantasy. It also shockingly debilitates ethical sense and individual liberty." So this is because the heart is connected to the tattva vayu, the element of air. And that's why alcohol destroys the capacity to think. So, or we don't have much capacity to think because we use the intellect. We don't use the mind how we should. We don't use the mind at the service of the consciousness. So first, we should learn to use the consciousness, to make the consciousness active, and then the mind subordinates itself and it becomes a wonderful instrument. So we already think very little because we reason, and reasoning is not thinking, is very different from thinking. So imagine we already have very little capacity to think, which is basically listening to the being. And that little capacity that we have, we completely destroy it by drinking alcohol. Also, drinking, says Master Samael, annihilates the capacity of judgment. So there is no self-criticism, there is no discernment, there's no self-judgment and obviously there won't be any repentment. Very difficult that there will be any psychological death in these conditions. Alcohol debilitates ethical sense. We can understand this because it's connected also to what I said before, to individual liberty. Obviously, this is because it happens in a hypnotic state of the ego or of the kunda artiguator, the kunda buffer. So all of this happens because it's connected to the tattva vayu, which is the element of air, and the air is connected to the mind. So it's very clear that alcoholic beverages agitate the mind. On top of that, if you meditate, if you want to meditate, then it becomes impossible because that mind will agitate itself even more than usual. So introspection will become extremely difficult, impossible. So that's how the ego survives, and that's how the ego resuscitates. Because without comprehension, without capacity of thinking, of judgment, there can't be any objective repentment. So without dying, what happens is that the ego resuscitates simply. When we stop dying, when a person stops dying, those egos take back what we have earned before. They take back what they had lost before. So this is another way of comprehending how the ego not only survives, but also resuscitates. Master Samael continues saying, "Hideous alcohol climbs the precipice and tumbles into the abyss of perdition. It is the malignant substance which intimately characterizes the infernal worlds." So, who wants to feed on substances of the abyss obviously has the right to do so. I rather feed myself with mercury and prana. Master Samael continues, "Never drink the accursed liquor, I tell you, because if you drink it, you will quickly lose the path." So, this can't be any clearer. What else could I say? Who wants to walk the path towards the being mustn't drink. Whoever is here in Gnosis merely for a form of belief doesn't consider all of this and neither feels the responsibility towards his own being. So we should all reflect on if we really want this path, or if we are just here because of habit or because it sounds good, but maybe we are not really Gnostic practitioners. Maybe we haven't really taken responsibility towards our own being, because perhaps we think that the path is not for us, that it's something very far from us. But in this case, not only we won't walk on the path, we will actually deviate, Master Samael says. Never drink the accursed liquor or you will lose the path. So this is very clear. Not only he's speaking of the initiatic path, because maybe not many Gnostics still have started this path, but he is speaking of the Gnostic path in general. So he is speaking about being able to work with our own capacities. He is speaking about maintaining some kind of connection to Gnosis, to the Master, to the White Lodge. Master Samael continues, "In his black depths, each demon fulfills its task, getting the vineyard ready until sunset, and like a god he calls you. When at merry supper the time to drink fermented wine arrives." So this is not only a problem for whoever drinks, but also for who produces wine or alcohol. As Master Samael here says, every demon does its own work, curing the vineyard, getting the vineyard ready. So we must remember as Gnostics that we need ethics on the workplace. Not every work, not every kind of job that surely we need in order to survive, but not any kind of job is in harmony with the ethics of the being and of the path. Obviously, if we want to truly know Gnosis, to truly walk on the path of Gnosis and awaken Kundalini and so on, we must also keep this into account. Master Samael continues, dictators from the past, tyrants, were not unaware that it is easier to govern and enslave a nation of drinkers than that of abstainers. And who are these idiots who seek to negotiate with Satan? Listen, my friends, with the sinister demon Algol, it is impossible to make compromises, arrangements, or any kind of crooked deal. Alcohol is very treacherous and sooner or later will stab us in the back. Many people with thelema will only drink 1 or 2 glasses a day. A terrific fiddle, isn't it? Compromises, arrangements, crooked deals. Talking of people inexperienced in life, in Socratic language, we can say not only they are ignorant, but they are also unaware of the fact that they are ignorant. Whether drinking a little or a lot, the atoms of the secret enemy, which are similar to microscopic pieces of glass, with the passage of time are furtively and subtly encrusted within the living cells of the human organism. So also this seems all very clear, this paragraph, right? What else can I say? I can only say that the ego justifies itself and finds excuses concerning this topic that we are talking about. And another justification of the ego is that this is a problem that only alcoholists have. Obviously not me or you. Many Gnostics would say, but I don't have this problem. The problem of alcohol is for who drinks very much, not for who drinks occasionally or just a glass or half a glass. This is a deviation, is an interpretation. Master Samael isn't saying that the problem is only for alcoholics. He is clearly saying in this paragraph that I read that even a little drink is bad for you. He said it very clear. It's a pact. It's a dealing with the devil. It's treachery. He is saying that also there is this little substance which is like microscopic glass that goes into your atoms, and those microscopic pieces of glass, they are not going to be digested. They are not going to be taken away from your body. That stays in your body and it accumulates in your body, and eventually it does its own psychological function. So what does it do? It resuscitates the ego. It creates fantasy, evasion, entropy, tendency to mechanicity, lack of will, and so on. So all of these are the effects of the demon Algol. This is how the demon Algol fashions his own hypnotic power onto us. And this is induced by these microscopic pieces of glass that accumulate in the body and never leave it. So the more you add of them, and the more power he has. So this is not just a problem that alcoholics have, it's a problem for whoever drinks even just a glass of wine, simply because the substance of alcohol is the same. Master Samael continues, divine beings as well as human beings know well that the demon Algol takes possession of the human body very subtly. So again, Master Samael says this, and if we need, we should read again this chapter of Master Samael with calm, or maybe we could listen to this talk again. So as I said, Master Samael is clearly saying what I was saying before, that the problem is not the quantity, the problem is the substance in itself. It doesn't matter if you drink a lot or you drink a little, it still has the same effect, because the substance is the problem, not the quantity. Divine beings as well as human beings know well that the alcohol demon takes possession of the human body very subtly and slowly, until one day it precipitates us towards the abyss of drunkenness and insanity. Insanity meant not only from a psychological point of view. Insanity is whoever lives only for the horizontal life. Insanity is to disconnect yourself gradually from an inner work, from the three factors, from the being, from Gnosis. Listen to me very carefully, Gnostic students. In the light of the sun or of the moon, of day or night, any agreement, transaction, diplomacy, or negotiation with this malignant spirit is condemned to failure sooner or later. You have to be radical with the alcohol demon. We are always very grateful to Master Samael for his clarity, for being so direct. So I consider very bad, even worse, a missionary that does this and that doesn't teach this. And if he doesn't teach this, Master Samael says the whole thing is even worse. And in fact, now Master Samael continues saying, the religious guide, priest, mystic, or prophet who makes the mistake of getting drunk with abominable alcohol is truly wretched. I would add not only who gets drunk, but who also occasionally drinks, according to what we've just explained. Master Samael continues, it is good to work for the salvation of souls, to teach the doctrine of the Lord, but truly I tell you that it is not fair to slap in the face those who follow you. Priests, anchorites, mystics, missionaries that teach the people with love, why do you scandalize them? Perhaps you ignore that scandalizing the people is equivalent to being disrespectful, to slapping your very followers in the face. When are you going to understand all of this? So again, as I said, it all seems very clear and direct how Master Samael speaks. Now, to finish with this point, I would add that I often laugh at certain situations. I have often had to explain to people that wine is an alcoholic beverage. Because as I said at the beginning, in some parts in which we do mission, it is custom to drink certain alcoholic beverages. It's part of the culture. So for example, around wine, in many parts of the world, there's a whole philosophy, there's a whole cult around wine, especially in Italy. It's considered a delicatessen product, something, don't know how many things around this. And so I have even had to explain and clarify that wine is alcohol. Because if you speak about alcohol or spirits, what people think is they think about vodka, they think about gin, or these kind of what we call spirits. But wine, they say, no, wine is not an alcoholic beverage, and that's how they think. Because they think wine, it's a delicatessen, it's something that you put on the table and that you can afford. So a whole stupid philosophy around a demon, essentially. So of course I also clarified here, of course, also the wine contains the demon alcohol. Wine contains a percentage of alcohol. around 8, 9, 10 degrees, depending on the type of wine. I also know how wine is made because my family for many years also produced wine, not to sell it, but to drink it themselves. So I also know how wine is made, what it is and what it isn't. I know it very well. So it wouldn't even be necessary to explain it, but I found myself cases of students that when I said that also wine is alcohol, they would look at me astonished. And I remember the student saying to me once, but wine isn't an alcoholic beverage. Well, I could say the same thing about beer. So beer has the same problem that we are now discussing. Beer contains atoms of alcohol. But beer has also a second problem, even bigger, that we will treat in the second point. That is, it's a carbohydrate, because the prime substance for producing beer is malt, barley, yeast. So it has a double problem. The one problem is the alcohol it contains, and the second problem is the fact that it's basically coming from a carbohydrate. So the same thing I could say about vinegar. Any type of vinegar, whether be cider vinegar, wine vinegar, Modena vinegar, which is very, again, it's considered a delicatessen product in many parts here in Italy. So all types of vinegar shouldn't be taken, because also the problem of the vinegar is a double problem, because it's a double fermentation and it also contains alcohol. So it's a double kind of fermentation, which means that it's a multiplication of hydrogens. It has higher density. On top of that, it contains alcohol, as I said. It's corrosive. It's also a corrosive substance, and this is well known in medicine. The acid it contains consumes the organs. Okay, so to conclude with this point, I would also say that in the same book, Mystery of the Golden Blossom by Master Samael, besides these parts of chapter 18 that I've just read, Master Samael dedicates other 2 chapters to this topic for those who want to meditate on them. These are chapter 15, which also the title is very clear. It's The Abominable Vice of Alcohol. And the other is chapter 13, where Master Samael speaks about the Pankatattva, or the ritual of Pankatattva. So there is a part, for example, in which he says that in order to integrate the element of air, is necessary to consume fruit. And this includes, obviously, grapes. So he speaks about grapes, not wine. It's not necessary any kind of fermentation. After a few hours, we know that those grapes start to ferment. So Master Samael speaks about this ancient oriental ritual called Pankatattva, which means of the 5 elements. And it's in order to live in harmony with external and internal nature. So he says that in the ritual Pankatattva, they used to use pure wine. Pure wine means non-fermented wine, so grape juice, basically. And this obviously brings us to the question, so did Jesus in the Last Supper, when he shared with the 12 apostles, and the 12 apostles include obviously Master Judas, that is often forgotten because of the Catholic deviation. But when Jesus shares with the 12 apostles, when he shares the wine and the bread also without yeast, because this was the Hebrew tradition. In the Hebrew tradition, they don't use yeast in bread. And also the grapes were not fermented, because also this was part of the Hebrew tradition. And it's not just a tradition, it's even written in the Torah. If you read the Torah, you will find this. So obviously, the Torah is a sacred text who the Jews at the time and still now would respect, would follow. And as we all know, Jesus and the apostles were Hebrew, were Jews. Their origin was Hebrew. And Jesus himself in the Gospel of Matthew, for example, in chapter 5, he says that he did not come to abolish the law or the prophets of the Old Testament. He says that he didn't come to abolish, but to actually make the law realize itself. So he's clearly saying that the prophets and the laws of the Torah, the laws of the sacred Hebrew tradition, he hasn't come to abolish them. So it's very clear that he also could not eat bread with yeast or grapes that were fermented, because this was part of that tradition. So what is part of the ceremony of the Last Supper is non-fermented grapes or wine, non-fermented wine. What we call wine, it's actually grape juice, because the fermentation outside of the physical body multiplicates the hydrogens, so it creates more density, not only physical density of that product, but also psychological density when we assume that substance. So it increases our atomic density, our atomic weight, and it makes us go down into the abyss, into the infradimensions, where we are further exploited by the ego. Okay, so this was the first point about alcohol and spirits. I would say now to make a short pause, because I see that 35 minutes have passed, and the second point won't be very long, but I think at this point we will now have a pause.
Okay, very well, thank you. Dear listeners, we will now have a 5-10 minute break, and we will put some music so as to have the time to look if any questions have arrived. If you want, you can still send questions regarding today's topic by clicking on the envelope icon that you will find on the radio page. We will be back in 5-10 minutes, and we will be happy to respond to your questions. Thank you.
A presto e grazie.
Bentornati di nuovo con questa conferenza di oggi. Un secondo punto, avevo fatto proprio una citazione.
Okay, welcome back everyone. I will now continue with today's topic. We will see a second point now. Just as I had cited part of chapter 13 of Mystery of the Golden Blossom by Master Samael, because now the second point that I would like to talk about as a deviation of theoretical and practical Gnosis is actually about diet without carbohydrates and pulses or legumes. So I will start precisely from chapter 13 that I had already commented concerning the previous point, which was alcohol and spirits, where Master Samael speaks about the ritual of Pankatattva, that is, the relationship with the 5 aspects of the Divine Mother, also through food. So we know that when we arrive at the element of earth, when we speak about the element of earth, we know that this element is normally associated to cereals. Now, cereals are carbohydrates. So this could seem a contradiction with what I'm about to say right now. But in reality, as we will see, Master Samael corrects this. And this is normal. It's a normal thing that every master, as he proceeds through his path, he goes correcting things. And although Mystery of the Golden Blossom is a book that dates year 71, 72, we know, however, that Master Samael released another book, which was called Occult Medicine and Practical Magic. That was actually one of the first books, but was then revisioned by Master Samael, and a second edition came out. And this second edition is precisely one of the last books that was edited. In fact, it dates year 76, 77. So in this book, in this final book, Master Samael, as I will read shortly, speaks very clearly about the damage that carbohydrates and legumes do in the body. On top of that, there is a recording of a conversation that Master Samael had in the last years during a lunch he was having with Gnostic students, in which he reconfirms this damage that carbohydrates do. But before I read these texts by Master Samael, I would like to speak about this revision that Master Samael did in year 77. So in this revision, we know that the element of earth, for example, in the Pankatattva ritual, goes on to be associated to vegetables and not cereals. Now, before we speak about this second point, I would like to start by saying that apparently it could seem to many that we are only speaking about a secondary aspect of Gnosis, a superficial aspect. Since we are talking about diet, we may think that it's just a physical thing, like as if we are some kind of yoga school. But actually, it's not like this. First of all, because Master Samael himself talks about these topics. And secondly, because diet is the base of our sexual energy. So according to what we breathe, what we eat, and what we think, that is, according to how we transform impressions, this creates our own Mercury, our own sexual energy, which are essentially the bricks of the great work. So diet isn't a secondary thing. We are not speaking here just about health as if we were a yoga school. We are speaking about the fact that what we eat then transforms into our own sexual energy, through which the Divine Mother can create the internal bodies. Also, sexual energy is the energy of the Holy Spirit. And this energy is also used by his wife, the Divine Mother Kundalini, in order to eliminate the ego. So it depends on the quality and on the quantity of this energy that we walk on the path. As I said, these are the bricks of the great work. We need them, we need these bricks for psychological death and for birth as well. And obviously, we also need them to serve humanity according to the quality of the energy that we each accumulate. On top of this, something also very obvious is that we all know that when we have health problems or when we are suffering some kind of illness, we know how limited we are by our own health. We know how limited we are to work on ourselves, because obviously the illness and the lack of health become a limit for our capacity to work internally and our capacity to sacrifice for humanity. So it is obvious that the healthier we are and the better we can work on ourselves and increase our sacrifice for humanity. So this is to clarify that it's not a secondary thing. Diet is not a secondary thing, but it's part of our rich Gnostic teaching. Now, I will now read to you this conversation that Master Samael had during a lunch, and then I will explain. It's a recording from the year 1975. I apologize, I had previously said 77, so it's actually a recording from the year 75. So this means it's a recording that came after the publishing of Mystery of the Golden Blossom. Anyway, it's from 1975. So shortly before the famous Congress of Guadalajara in Mexico. Master Samael is here with several Gnostic students, and in the first 5 minutes he speaks about what a correct diet would be, and he literally says this: to be in good health and be slim, it is not necessary to cause any hunger. Simply, it's necessary to suppress flours, starches, and sugar. This is all. As for the rest, we can eat anything: meat, vegetables, fish. But we mustn't eat bread or flour products that only come to damage the body. They damage the liver, the organs, the kidneys, and they create fat and ill bodies. So to eat those things, it is absurd. So this is what Master Samael says: to suppress flours, bread, pasta, pizza, all kinds of cereals, starches, legumes, which includes legumes, of course, and all kinds of sugars. So when we say sugars, we don't only mean desserts or sweet stuff. Sugars are also contained in rice, in potatoes. As I will explain now, all these kind of foods, they transform in the body. And 80% of those products, they actually transform in sugar inside the body. And we will then see all the problems that this creates. So luckily, once again, Gnosis, or should I say, once again, Master Samael, reveals to us another great fraud of this society. A diet fraud, a food fraud, a fraud by pseudo-medicine of science without consciousness, which is the so-called Mediterranean diet. Now I will explain this. So the only cells in the body that use glucose, that is sugars, as a form of energy, it's the nervous cells in the brain, which are called neurons. And also the white fiber cells and the red blood cells. All other cells in the body, they use fat in order to function. On top of that, neuron cells need only a very small quantity of sugar, that is 8 grams every day. And this quantity of sugars or glucose is taken from the vegetables and from fruit, like for example 3 fruits a day maximum, or 1 fruit after each meal, because fruit contains fructose, which of course, and also it is contained in vegetables, so it is not necessary to intake any extra sugars, or I repeat, carbohydrates like bread, pasta, pizza, cereals, rice, potatoes, which transform in the organism in 80% of sugars. So what happens when glucose is in great quantities in our blood? It happens that our body, through the pancreas, produces a hormone in order to eliminate the glucose that is in excess, in order to avoid reaching diabetic coma. And this hormone is called insulin. So it produces insulin not only to avoid diabetic coma, but also to avoid damagement of the organs, as Master Samael says. So this damage may appear in one organ or may appear in a different organ. So a kind of inflammation is produced in the physical organism. In some people, this inflammation will manifest in a way, and in some other people, it will manifest in a different way or in a different organ. So, of course, these people would then go to the doctor, who gives them some medication that simply cover the problem, but they don't work on the causes of the problem. So what medicines and doctors do, they try to suppress the symptom. But by doing this, what happens is that kind of damage will appear in a different organ, and so on, until the whole body is compromised and we may face death. Or we may simply live a life of illness, or a life where we have to take medication constantly. And very often we know this kind of medication makes the consciousness sleep profoundly. So the excess of sugars, I repeat, not only of desserts or sweet stuff, which obviously we should completely avoid them, but also the excess of carbohydrates makes sure that the body, in order not to produce a diabetic coma, produces insulin. But by producing insulin, another reaction is produced. Another consequence, which is the production of cortisol. And cortisol, it is well known, produces inflammation. And this is the result of damage in each organ because of inflammation. Instead, who consumes fats? The fat is beneficial because the body functions with animal protein. So the fat burns other fat, and the body functions well and is not damaged in this case. So we find all of this in this comment, in this talk by Master Samael in 1975. I had also previously forgotten about this teaching of Master Samael, or should I say the ego made me forget, because this is what the ego does. The ego makes us forget things, or makes us ignore what in a certain moment is uncomfortable for us or for him. So we say that we don't comprehend, we don't understand what Master Samael is talking about, so we ignore it, or we forget about it, or we just put it on a side. We put it on a side, justifying ourselves, saying that we don't understand it, or that it's not convenient for us. So this basically means that I'm giving way to my own ego, to my own vices and dependencies of the ego. Not only physical needs, but also psychological needs of the ego. So even I had forgotten about this talk by Master Samael, about this teaching concerning diet. I wasn't very concerned about it because, as I said before, many of us think that the most important thing is the inner work. However, it is true that years ago I found myself with very bad health problems, and the first answer that I gave to myself, the first reason I gave to myself, is that these health problems were probably due to my initiatic process, and that these problems were probably the result of a psychological revolution or a biologic insurrection, as Master Samael says. Luckily, internally, in an astral experience, my Divine Mother came, and 15 days later, this experience, a second astral experience came while I was out of my body with active consciousness. And I remember that I found my own being in this experience, who reminded me about this teaching that I had previously forgotten. The words of my Divine Mother in the first experience with her concerning this topic were very, very clear. At that time, I repeat, I was having health problems. Doctors were giving me medication that I would have had to take for the rest of my life. I had just turned 40 at the time, so I would say, how is it possible that I have to take all this medication for the rest of my life when I'm still so young? And I could see also the consequences that medication was producing onto me. I saw the major difficulty in maintaining my consciousness active. So my Divine Mother in this astral experience in front of me literally said, the cause of all illnesses, physical and etheric, are carbohydrates. Well, I was very shocked, as it usually happens when you have such a strong revelation from a master, from a part of the being. So I was so shocked that I returned to the physical body. And as I returned to the physical body, I have to be honest, because as I said, I wasn't very concerned about diet or anything like that. So I have to be honest, I didn't even know what carbohydrates were. So I had to get up and I had to search on my laptop, on the internet, what are carbohydrates? And that's how I found out everything that I've just been talking about. So cereals, legumes, potatoes, and so on. So cereals are the problem because, as I said before, they transform in the body in 80% sugars. And then we have insulin and cortisol, and thus we have inflammations and so on. Not only cereals, but also legumes or pulses, because they also contain starch. So beans, chickpeas, and so on. All kinds of legumes contain starch. It doesn't matter if we wash them, because some people say this about rice. They say the same thing, that it's sufficient to wash it. No, starch is contained in the substance itself. So another problem is that today's grains, today's rice, isn't the same that we had millennia ago when Jesus would eat this or when the Egyptians would eat this. So the product has changed completely. So the problem in legumes is the starch. And starch is what makes the organs dry out. So it makes them more rigid and they end up functioning bad. So on top of this talk from 1975 of Master Samael during a lunch, as I said, in the last books, especially in the reviewed version of Occult Medicine and Practical Magic, at least in the Spanish version, we find at page 287 this text, where Master Samael says never to eat flours, starches, and desserts. So this is a reconfirmation, I repeat, that is found in one of the last books of Master Samael, Occult Medicine. So to finish with this second point, just as I said about alcoholic beverages and spirits, I've also heard many excuses concerning this second point. The ego of the Gnostics often use Gnosis itself in order to justify for ignorance or to justify the vices, dependencies that not only are diet dependencies, food habits, but also psychological dependencies. So behind something so simple as diet, one can find many psychological aspects. So, for example, justification or excuse that I have often heard when I remind this Gnostic teaching of Master Samael is, for example, many people say, I am ill or I have this illness because it's part of my karma. I have a certain karma that manifests in this illness. I say that it's too easy to always blame karma. It's too easy to blame karma instead of our own vices, instead of our own bad habits. It's easy not to see that Master Samael is clearly indicating an error. Instead, I don't want to accept that. I'd rather accept and say that it's simply my karma. So in this way, it's obviously easy to continue with my own habits. Because it's not diet, the problem is karma. So the poor lords of karma, they always get the blame. In this way, understand that it's very, very easy to continue reiterating the same mistake. Karma, of course, exists, but not everything is karma. If you eat badly, the consequence is that you get ill. It's very simple. That's not karma, that's law of accidents, as Master Samael would say. So without saying any further, simply you are provoking that illness with the excuse that you don't have money to eat protein every day, with the excuse that meat and fish cost a lot of money. Yes, they do cost, but also medication costs. So what are you saying? That you have money for medication, or you have money for cigarettes, or you have money to basically nurture your own vices? You have money to go to the doctor, but you don't have money to eat better? And on top of this, health problems, as I said, create difficulty in the inner work, in sacrifice for humanity, in going frequently to a Gnostic association. So is this more important, or is it more important to have money, the economy, or is what I eat more important? What I eat, which then allows me or doesn't allow me to do a correct inner work. So everybody should reflect on this. This is another point for me of deviation from Gnosis that's very, very common, I would say. Gnostics, unfortunately, don't take into account this part of Master Samael teaching. So what happens is that then their poor Divine Mother has to do extra work in order to maintain that body, that is her body as well, the physical body and the energetic body. So the third and last point of today concerns the need to attend lectures in presence. So this third point concerns the transmission of Gnosis in presence and not online, on Zoom or Skype or all these kind of things. So first of all, I'd like to clarify that I'm not speaking about the use of the radio or other technological uses that there are, which are instead very useful for people that live far apart from far from a Gnostic center. It's also true that far is a very relative issue because it depends on each of us. For example, where we are in Florence, we have students coming from Milan, from Modena, from Verona, Siena, Arezzo, and so on. So we have people that come after a 4-hour drive or a 2-hour or 1 hour. So also who lives in Florence? There are some students that live in a totally opposite part of the city and they take 40 minutes to arrive. So the concept of far is very relative. It depends how we want to see that. Obviously, in these cases, for these people that come from far away, we don't expect that they come every week. In reality, we don't expect anything in the first chambers. This kind of expectancy is found in the more advanced chambers. But anybody, even in these cases, the people that live far away, anybody can surely attend 1 week on and off. So we also had people who had to take a plane. That is, that they live somewhere very far from a Gnostic center. Obviously, we can't expect much from these people if they don't have the possibility or they don't want. But if they do want, of course, they can perhaps come to a Gnostic center at least once a month. It is possible. So why is physical contact so fundamental? It is fundamental because it creates a contact from consciousness to consciousness. It creates a transmission of the Gnostic teaching. It creates a necessary contact, physical and energetic. Human contact is fundamental. Speaking with one another in a spontaneous way, whenever that happens in our meetings. I could also use one of the first principles of Hermes Trismegistus to explain this. As above, so below, as below, so above. That is, physical presence allows us to also have a spiritual presence, that is, the presence of the being. So there are many reasons for why presence is important, and I will now explain other reasons as well. So to these people that live far away from a Gnostic center and to whom we suggest, for example, radio conferences, we also suggest that from the radio, from merely listening to radio conferences, they should then have a project to attend or even to move residence, to change their job, if they truly want to walk on the path. Or even if they just simply want to have the possibility to comprehend Gnosis. Because without the physical presence in a Gnostic center, all that we hear, everything that we hear through a technological instrument, a recording or so on, simply turns into intellectual information. So it is information for the intellect that never arrives to the emotional center. It doesn't go into the consciousness. So it just creates a new mass of theories that usually go into conflict with the other theories that one has within itself. So they just simply create major dualism, major confusion, and in the end they create frustration, incomprehension, and denial of everything, because the result is that one cannot comprehend anything in this way, and this is very sad. So the radio is useful, we believe, especially for who lives far away, as I said, or as a complement. Even a conference, a talk like the one I'm doing right now, and for which I say thanks once again to Radio Koradi and to all the team. But this cannot substitute a Gnostic center. It cannot substitute a Gnostic pedagogy or a group of work, a line of work, constant, daily, of the students between themselves, of brothers or disciples or brothers with their teacher, with their missionary, and so on. So obviously we appreciate the radio. It's a very useful instrument, as even Master Samael said. In fact, we are using it, I repeat, and I I always say thanks for this possibility, but it should be used in the correct environment, in the correct context. And that context would be in the case of somebody who lives very, very far in a country where Gnosis doesn't exist, where there is no Gnostic centers. Although in that case, what I would personally do is move. So I would look for a job in a different place, in a different country where I could go to a Gnostic center in person. This is what I would personally do, and thus this is what I can suggest. You cannot follow Gnosis through talks via radio or through recordings that a missionary sends to you. I say no to this. I said why, and we will see now other reasons. The radio is a complement. We also say thanks to all the brothers and sisters that expose themselves through Radio Koradi. But these are reflections that I could need in a certain moment, in a second moment. I cannot consider this a pedagogical system of instruction, of education. It's not a true work that can allow me to walk on the path. It's not a true work that I can find instead in a group, for example, and that connects me to my own being, and it connects me to your being. So this wouldn't be possible online or on radio, Zoom, Skype, and so on. So I will now explain other reasons why this isn't possible in case anybody needs. For example, during the pandemics, which would be better to call the plandemics because it was a diabolic plan. During the coronavirus pandemics, many missionary brothers, I would say the majority to be honest, had online lessons on Zoom or on Skype, etc., etc. I didn't agree with this, and I still don't agree. I never did this at the time, and I will never do this in the future. I don't accept that this is the only possibility in those conditions to do something. Because if we want, we can always find better solutions. And no matter, despite all the difficulties, which are government controls, police checks, our own fears, psychological fears, etc. So despite all the difficulties that one may find, if one wants, one can find the solution. Especially if the missionary has this very clear in his mind and he transmits this to the students, he teaches this to the students, then the missionary offers the opportunity to the students to comprehend this also. Obviously, there is no obligation in this, but it is important, however, that students comprehend the importance of maintaining personal attendance to the association, to the Gnostic Center, so as to continue their Gnostic life. I could also say that just as nobody is obliged to attend Gnosis in person, neither I am obliged to give Gnosis online simply because of social obstacles or civil obstacles, or because of the fears or because of the incomprehensions of people. I am not obliged to give Gnosis online simply because you cannot transmit Gnosis online. It's not possible. You cannot transmit through those messages. You can only give a subject for the intellect. That's all. So I'm not obliged to do what one shouldn't do. So in order to help me comprehend that I had to continue teaching in presence and what teaching online would have meant, the being at the time took me in the astral, in the homes of certain students, and he would make me see them in front of a computer, in front of a tablet or a phone, a cell phone, and supposedly they were listening to Gnostic conferences. But I would see how actually their beings were sleeping intensely. They were snoring. So it wasn't just sleeping, it wasn't just a physical sleep, it was a profound sleep of the consciousness. So in this way, with this experience, they made me clearly understand that through those instruments, it is not Gnosis, it's just intellectualism that we can transmit. Those messages don't touch the consciousness. So the being for 2 months, averagely, when the pandemics exploded, because it lasted almost 2 months, he would make me see every week, he would indicate me in the internal worlds that I had to continue to stay open. Because obviously I was also worried at the beginning, not worried for me, but worried for the eventual fines the student could have on the way to the Gnostic Center. I was worried for the students, for the consequences that they could have found if they had been caught by the police. So I wasn't scared, or I didn't have doubts concerning my own pedagogical system of teaching. So past this period, those types of experiences had also passed. So obviously there wasn't any need for the being to remind me of this, because they had already shown me for several weeks that this was the right way to follow. Of course, each student was then free to do or to act as they considered better for them. So in order to make a further reflection on this point, could any one of you imagine, for example, Jesus transmitting the mysteries through a computer, or Master Samael? Master Samael did talks in radios and TVs, and we know them, but they were public conferences. They were informative, exactly as we are doing now in this moment. But then Master Samael had a first chamber, he had a second chamber, and a third chamber. That is, he taught us to have a structure in the teaching, a pedagogical order. We could transmit, practice, and live real Gnosis. Everything else is just instrument for publicity, for advertising, which is good because we need to present ourselves to the world. We need to introduce Gnosis, that's fine. But those instruments aren't fine to study profoundly Gnosis. So we can consider the example that Master Samael himself gave us. For example, he would move around entire Mexico, not only to help the missionaries, but also to transmit Gnosis to students that lived far from Mexico City. For example, we all know that Master Samael would drive many hours, like 6 hours, with his yellow car through Mexico in order to teach the first chamber, which is the first level of Gnosis, to one student only. He would drive 6 hours way and back, so 12 hours in total. And this is a very famous story that people still tell about Master Samael, because Master Samael would say that he took that journey, that long journey, to arrive to that student's house. And when he arrived to the student's house, this student would fall asleep. So one would think, why did Master Samael not do this on the phone? There wasn't Zoom or Skype at the time of Master Samael, of course, but yes, they had phones. In fact, he spoke with many people on the phone for administrative questions, with missionaries and so on, but he would never speak on the phone to transmit the Gnostic teaching. So why wouldn't he simply call this person on the phone who lived at 6 hours distance and who even would fall asleep when Master Samael would give him the Gnostic teaching? Why did he take his yellow car and drive 6 hours to go and teach this guy in person if it was only one person, and on top of that he would fall asleep? Of course, this was for an esoteric reason, right? If we know Master Samael, we should know that there's always an esoteric reason for what he did, and not just fanaticism, or not just because he couldn't find other solutions. So I could carry on making many other examples. For example, could we ever imagine the logos of this planet, Melchizedek, or other immortal masters like Cagliostro or Saint Germain, or any archangel teaching online, teaching Gnosis online? Definitely not. This is what human beings do. These errors are made by the bodhisattvas of the masters, but surely not the being, right? So besides the pandemics, which was just an example to speak about this point, I've also found myself, unfortunately, with the fact that this teaching online still serves as an excuse to continue teaching online, because the worst thing is that not only in those circumstances with the red code, Gnosis was taught online, but the worst thing is that many missionaries continue to do it, because now they have discovered that it's a comfortable way of doing it, because both missionaries and students, they have got used to that system, so they require it occasionally. So this thing has become a bad habit, a deviation from the way, a deviation of the way of teaching Gnosis. So the example of the pandemics then is connected to many other excuses or justifications that I still hear. For example, I don't agree with the notion that there is a world karma that exists. In the sense, yes, of course there is a world karma, but what is this supposed to mean? That people simply have to endure this karma? That they simply have to suffer this karma, and I shouldn't do anything in order to help them? So as if to say, it's a world karma, they should just get on with it and just suffer it. So my question would be, what exactly is sacrifice for humanity if not helping in the midst of world karma? What is sacrifice for humanity if not helping people to come out of that world situation that concerns all of us? If the pandemics is a diabolic plan, as I said, what am I supposed to do? Do I fight against it or I don't fight against it? And if I don't fight against it, don't I become an ally to this plan? The Christ is compassionate with all of us, of course, but he's also a fighter. He fights against the diabolic plans. So the actual Christ is compassionate with humanity, but he fights. He's a fighter against diabolic plans. He doesn't give up. So if the tenebrous ones, they go against me, if they put obstacles, what should we do? Should we follow the current? Should we follow a pedagogical system that ceases to be Gnosis? These are things that I think everybody should reflect on. I think they are justifications. Justifications like people are not interested in Gnosis anymore because we are at the end of the race. And so why am I doing this? Why am I teaching it? Am I teaching Gnosis for interest, to create proselytes? Or am I a missionary because I want that people listen to me merely? Am I a proselytist? Or instead, are we talking about sacrifice, how it truly is? That is, uninterested. I'm not interested in how many people listen to me. I simply teach Gnosis. I don't care if there is 1 student, 10 students, nobody. This isn't going to stop me to continue to spread Gnosis until the last day of my life, even if nobody listens to it. Otherwise, where is uninterested sacrifice? This would be interested sacrifice, which is not conscious sacrifice. So the excuse is also because, as I said, we are at the end of the race. So now we should only occupy ourselves with inner work. Surely we can never forget inner work. The missionary should continue to sacrifice himself or herself, just as a Gnostic student should. But the thing is that the missionary has also consecrated himself as a missionary in order to sacrifice for humanity, not just for inner work. One thing doesn't take the other way. So if one has become a missionary for vocation and voluntarily, is to be a missionary, not a hermit. A missionary is not a hermit that simply occupies himself with his own inner work and doesn't occupy himself about humanity, simply because humanity is no longer interested in Gnosis. If humanity is no longer interested in Gnosis, I feel sorry for humanity, but I continue to spread it until the last day, until a bomb doesn't fall on my head, until this body dies. What would otherwise be the missionary vocation? I don't understand mission in a different way. So, concerning this point, that is the fact that it's not possible to spread the Gnosis online, I also suggest to meditate on the past. In the past, people would walk miles and miles in order to find a temple of mysteries, in order to find the true master. We know cases of people, individuals that would also risk their lives for dangers with animals or dangers of hunger in the desert. So they would also risk their lives, and sometimes they would never arrive at those schools, at those temples. Or maybe they would arrive at those temples, but they wouldn't open the doors to them. So how many cases like this do we know in the history of humanity? People walking long distances, long miles, even at the cost of their own lives. And now what should I do? I should spread the sacred mysteries through Zoom or Skype or through the internet. This is insane. It's a profanation. So it's important also to reflect on the fact that we often forget about the value that the word has, the verb, Johann, the logos. Do you believe that it's possible to transmit through a screen? Is it possible to transmit the verb, the power of the word through a screen? And this power is not only the tone of the voice, it's also the consciousness. Do you think that the consciousness of the verb can go through a screen or through the internet. No, that's just a cable, that's a physical thing, and obviously it arrives at the physical part. But in order for the verb to arrive, we need to listen. How many conferences, how many talks has Master Samael done on learning how to listen? Learning how to listen is not cleaning one's ear. It's not listening with the headphones, a talk through a radio. In order to truly listen, we need consciousness. Someone might say, well, I can activate consciousness in my own home. Yes, but that consciousness of yours has to interact with another consciousness in presence in order for the verb to be transmitted, in order for the knowledge to be transmitted. So this is the power of the word. Master Samael has spoken a lot about this, about the larynx chakra, Vishuddha, which means purity. So this is the basis of the Gnostic teaching, the power of the word, and the relationship of the word with the sexual aspect. So we should always keep this present and meditate on it. We should also reflect on the importance of oral transmission, that is the priority of oral transmission through teaching that's given from master to disciple. This has always been a practice of all the mystery schools of the past and should continue to be like this in the present. Otherwise, this won't be a Gnostic school anymore. Of course, sacred texts of fundamental reading and so on, but the learning, the understanding of their meaning happens exclusively through the relationship, through the direct relationship between teachers, masters, and disciples. Could anyone imagine asking Jesus or Samael, so shall we connect this evening through Zoom? What do you say, Jesus, Samael? Should we see each other on Skype tonight? What would they think about this? It's ridiculous, right? So it's precisely on oral transmission that many masters taught. In India, for example, there is no prohibition to write down the Vedas. In fact, it's been many centuries that you can find printed sacred texts like the Vedas in India. But it's still alive in India, the idea that in order to express their true potential and their true power, the Vedas must be recited with a word, exactly how they were transmitted in the very beginning. So the Hindu religion, which constituted itself in a latter period, although the Hindu religion recalls itself and is based on the Vedas, it actually differs from them because it proposes a cult of the images that wasn't existent before, and it doesn't highlight oral transmission. Instead, this was very clear in the original Vedic tradition, before Brahmanism, before Hinduism. We also have oral direct transmission in Tibetan Buddhism. And this is also a word in Tibetan language, which is lung, which is considered the soul of the tradition. The transmission from person to person, because it's the continuity of the energy of the voice which transfers the power and the energy of the masters, because it connects the student to a precious root of teaching that has been passed down for centuries through uninterrupted lineage of masters. It is through the voice of a master that the listener receives the blessing, receives trust in himself or herself, removes his doubts, and develops the consciousness, the spiritual consciousness of its own lineage. The heart of the lineage, which is Shangyut in Tibetan, is oral transmission. And this heals the body and the mind. Of course, also Tibetan Buddhism and Hinduism have deviated now. It is not only us Gnostics that deviate. Another example is Sufism. So in the Sufi Gnosticism, in Islamic esotericism, they speak about the baraka, which literally means grace or blessing. The baraka, or divine grace, is considered in Sufism transmittable from a prophet or from a holy man, from a master of a tariqat, that is a school, a center, and it's transmissible to one of his disciples. And the modality of transmission are exclusively physical, that is, from lips to ears, from person to person. And this practice of transmission, which is called silsila in Arabic, highlights the existence of a legitimate chain of transmission, which in our case we call the Gnostic tradition, or tradition and revelation. To conclude, we will now have another pause, and then we will gladly answer the questions that are arriving. Now, if I weren't a Gnostic and I would want to look for and find for the true religion or a true form of spirituality in today's world, I would look for the only one that doesn't agree with the world. I would look for that religion that is hated from the world and from the other religions in brackets. In fact, if in today's world the Christic nature has any hope in a religion, this religion should still be hated, just as it was 2,000 years ago. So if today you want to find the Christ within you, if you want to find Gnosis, if you want to find the inner path of redemption, you should look for the religion that doesn't agree with the world, that doesn't follow the logic of the world, that follows contrary ways to the world. Look for the religion that the tenebrous powers and people, in brackets, normal people, want to destroy in the name of God or in the name of science without consciousness, or in the name of knowledge without consciousness. Look for that religion that the world, even the in brackets Gnostic world, denies, just as men denied the Christ 2,000 years ago. Can you imagine Jesus wearing a face mask, a COVID mask? Or wasn't it Jesus the one that would hug people that suffered from leper? Can you imagine Saint Francis of Assisi that wears a mask? Or wasn't it Saint Francis that used to heal the lepers? So the true Gnostic is recognized in temptation, in illness, in suffering, in misery, in adversity. The true Gnostic loves the Christ, loves sacrifice, fights against the Antichrist. Instead, the Antichrist tries in many ways to impede, to prevent Gnosis from being taught. So, worse than all, there's not only who does online lessons, but also who does second chamber activities online. This is a total deviation. There's no other name to define it. It's a blasphemy, profanation of the sacred. So there is a reason if Master Samael created the pedagogical system of the three chambers. There is a public chamber, which we call first chamber, A cycle, B cycle, meditation chamber, how it's called in different institutions. Then there is a mesoteric chamber, and finally a more esoteric or internal chamber. So three chambers, first, second, and third. So it's very bad whoever publishes online or on YouTube activities that pertain to the internal chambers, which are the second and the third chamber. This is the contrary of what Gnosis is, which is an esoteric school, is a hermetic school, a mystery school. So some might say, oh, but Master Samael himself did this at the beginning on a public level. I say, yes, I know. It's not that I don't know the history of the Gnostic movement or of Master Samael, but Master Samael only did this in the first years, and he only did it in Colombia. He then corrected this because he realized that this was a mistake, so he corrected this. He understood that people weren't ready, they weren't prepared for this, they didn't comprehend. So, to continue in such a way, instead of helping, what it does, it burns the possibility of a consciousness or of a soul that perhaps with a more correct pedagogical system could go on, could carry on in the internal path of his own being or of Gnosis. Instead, in this way, you are suggesting, you are proposing activities at a higher level, a second or third chamber level, publicly, even online on YouTube, without a base of internal work, without any form of knowledge. So think that the minimum in the past that one should learn in these mystery schools was 7 years. And that still isn't enough. So if you don't prepare people, the only thing that they will do with all the good intentions is they will burn their own possibility to walk on the path. And this is really bad. These are the consequences of the good egos. This is what the good egos does. This is what the lack of consciousness does. So I also would like to say about this point that not everything that you find online, or not everybody that call themselves Gnostics or that refer to Master Samael's teaching are actually Gnostic. Because either they don't teach Gnosis in a complete form, or they don't teach it at all, or they don't follow the pedagogical system of the three chambers in the correct way. So when somebody listens for the first time about Gnosis and then goes and search on the internet, I always say to this person, not everything that you're going to find online means that it is Gnosis. So there are deviations, and we are seeing that. So for those who haven't listened, if you want, you can also listen the first part of this series of conference where I clarified the reason and the motivation for this topic. As we said, we will have a third part with the radio, and maybe there will be other parts, I don't know. Now, I'll finish today's topic by reminding that there is a Christic passage when the Christ invites the Holy Spirit, which is also the power of the revelation, of the grace, of the transmission, of the tradition and the revelation. So Jesus explains very clearly that this is due to the fact that before the coming of this power, sacrifice exists. There is sacrifice. So it is precisely sacrifice towards the being and towards humanity that allow you to receive this transmission. If I'm sitting comfortably in my own house, there is no sacrifice, there is no transmission. You hear it, but you're not listening to it. You're not listening to the message. You understand it intellectually, but you don't comprehend it. The message doesn't arrive to the consciousness. I will now conclude by reading a wonderful discourse of Master Samael in the Congress of Guadalajara concerning what a missionary is and how he or she should transmit Gnosis. Just a part I will read. I then suggest everybody to read it entirely because it's worth it. But I will only read certain parts. Master Samael says, "We need missionaries duly trained for Canada and Europe, patient men capable of enduring the most arduous disciplines, friends of culture, aspirants to pure science, who feel in their hearts the mysticism of Saint Francis of Assisi. We want missionaries in whom the beauty of the spirit and the power of love truly shine. Missionaries who are scientists as well as poets, who can investigate the atom and pause to meditate on the singing stream that flows in its bed of rocks. Missionaries who truly know how to love all humanity. This is the class of missionaries we long for. Missionaries who can admire the twinkling of the stars. Missionaries who are in love with pure nights. Missionaries who have a lovely fiancé, and may this fiancé be called Urania, the divine mother. This is the class of missionaries we desire. Missionaries who want to lay the carpet at the feet of the Guru to receive his wise precepts. Missionaries who deeply yearn for Christification and truly feel the beauty of love as Brother Francis felt it in his heart. Missionaries like this are the ones we need. We want missionaries who, with slow and gentle pace of the great hermits, go from door to door preaching the word. So from door to door, not from computer to computer or from cell phone to cell phone or Zoom or Skype. We want missionaries who, with a slow and gentle pace, go from door to door, preaching the word. This is the kind of missionaries we want. We want only one thing, to love humanity deeply. Venerable Master Samael Aun Weor.
Ringrazio anch'io la squadra di Radio Koradi e a tutti gli ascoltatori.
Okay, very well, thank you. Dear listeners, we will now leave you for a 5-minute break. We will put some music on again, so as to have the time to check if you've sent any questions. If you want, you can still send questions about today's talk by clicking on the envelope icon that you will find on the radio page. We will be back in 5 minutes and we will be happy to respond to your questions, if any. Thank you and see you shortly.
Okay, welcome back, dear listeners, and thank you for still being with us. And also thank you for the questions that you've sent. So there are 3 questions. The first question is by Andrea. Now, I would like to say to you, Andrea, that for this question, I'd rather answer you privately because the question is interesting, is a very important question, in fact. But it concerns a second chamber aspect. And just as I was saying during the talk, as I was saying concerning second chamber, we don't consider it right to share these kind of things online or in public. So I'm not evading the answer. I'm not evading a reply. On the contrary, I'm quite happy about your question. So through the radio, we will make sure that the reply will arrive to you. I think that the radio has informed me that there is an email that you shared with them, so I can send you my reply to that email. Otherwise, you can write to me directly. But as I said, if the radio passes me your email, I will answer you directly. So let's carry on to the second question.
The second question is by Rachele. She says, "Good evening, Gonzalo and Lorena. Would it be possible to know what Gnosis says about fermented drinks, such as fermented water or milk? That is, water kefir and milk kefir? Thanks a lot. I am very grateful for your words. Thanks, Rachele."
Okay, so concerning all fermented products, I had already done a comment about this problem actually during the talk when I said that fermentation multiplicates the hydrogens. So when one knows that conference by Master Samael says that the elements in nature have a certain atomic weight. So we're not speaking about official chemistry here, but we're talking about esoteric chemistry. So in this case, atomic weight means more psychological weight. It means psychological density. So according to this, there's either more consciousness or more ego. There's either a connection to the superior dimensions or to the infra dimensions. We either sink or we emerge, depending on the weight, on the hydrogen. So this is the problem about fermented products, about one fermentation, two fermentations, and so on. Just as I had done the example of vinegar, which is a double fermentation. So this is the general aspect. More specifically, the thing about kefir, about yogurt, and so on, the problem in this case is milk. So there are two things here that we must clarify, and one is the issue of milk. Animal milk is to feed, is to grow, it's needed for growth. Milk has the growth hormone, so it is indispensable also for human beings during the period of growth. But when this growth has already been produced to a certain extent, let's say up to 20 years or 21 years old, if we continue to drink animal milk, whatever it may be, so it could be cow milk or goat milk or sheep milk, whatever. So this creates this problem, and the problem is that what we're doing is we're carrying on taking this growth hormone when actually our body doesn't grow anymore because it already has been developed. So what this does, it produces multiplication of the cells, and when the cells multiplicate unnecessarily, they eventually create tumors, cancers. So milk is fundamental for the child, but it is a damage for adults. Instead, one thing that doesn't contain the growth hormone is cream. So the process of cream, or the process of making ricotta cheese, the process then in which we elaborate these products, or for example, the process in order to make mature cheese that has more than 20 or 24 months. These systems of production, they make sure that the growth hormone disappears, and so we can take that product. But we don't take it under the form of milk. We take it under the form of ricotta cheese that is done with whey, milk whey, Or, as I said, I can use cream mixed with water instead of milk. For example, me and Lorena, we have substituted milk for breakfast. Instead of drinking milk, we mix 50% of water with 50% of cream. Because, as I said, cream doesn't contain the growth hormone, and neither does mature cheese. So if one needs to use any kind of cheese, it's obviously better to use the ones that are very mature, and also other types. Anyway, this isn't the case now to talk much about this, because it would be very long to explain in detail. But let's say, just to be synthetic, that it's mainly mature cheeses, very, very mature cheeses that don't contain the growth hormone. So this was the first problem about milk. The second problem concerns the microbiota. So in our intestine, there is 80% of our immunologic system. So that's why it's very important, all that we've just talked about concerning diet that Master Samael teaches, because if you don't eat well, if you eat sugars, carbohydrates, legumes, and so on, all of this destroys the immunologic system, and then all the problems start to arise. So if you don't have immune defenses, if you don't have a good immune system, you will end up having autoimmune diseases or disorders, which in fact are very frequent recently. And why are they so frequent? Obviously because of diet. So these cause a lot of problems, not just a simple inflammation. So to try to regulate, for example, the thousands of bacteria that are in the intestine is to risk. Because there are thousands, millions of bacteria in our intestine. And when we take milk enzymes or lactic ferments, we don't agree with this, because you don't know if you're truly going to need them or not. We only suggest this. We only suggest to take lactic ferments if one has, for example, taken antibiotics, because we know antibiotics literally destroy all kinds of bacteria in the intestine. So surely I will need all kinds of bacteria because I have no bacteria left. So in that case, yes, for 5 or 6 days or a week, it is justified that one takes lactic ferments. But not in other cases, because it's risking, it's playing with your body. As I said, there are so many thousands of different bacteria that we have in the body. So unless one does a very, very specific type of exam in order to know which kind of bacteria, which kind of ferments are missing and which aren't, then you can't possibly know which kind of lactic ferments to buy. You may even buy the best ones or the more important ones or the more suggested ones on the market, but truly speaking, you don't know if you have them in your body or you're missing them. So, and this is the same problem for kefir. So, in reality, the best way to regulate the microbiota is simply to have a correct diet. If one quits eating carbohydrates, legumes, your own system, the Divine Mother, the instinctive center, the intelligence of the physical body will do the rest of the job. So the Divine Mother will regulate our intestine and the immunologic system without any need of taking lactic ferments or kefir, which is not suggested. Also for the thing about milk, which I've just said, the problem with milk. So I think I have replied to this. There's also a third question.
The third question is, what do you think about those Gnostic schools in which the doctrine is almost imposed on students in a very strict way?
Okay, well, the question is a bit generic, but I understand the idea. I would say that nothing in life, either Gnosis or anything else, should be imposed as a principle. So not only Gnosis, nothing should be imposed. That is my idea, my opinion, and so on. Even if I think that what I believe in is right or is correct, to impose something, it's always the ego that wants to impose. We can suggest, we can advise, and that is all. So even Gnosis, I suggest Gnosis, I advise people to take the Gnostic path, but then, first of all, I apply Gnosis onto myself. What happens is that when somebody imposes something is because he or she doesn't do it himself. So we impose to others in order to cover our own faults, our own lack of work. Also, we normally impose in order to feed our own ego of self-importance, our pride, our self-affirming. So when one dies in these psychological aspects, there is no need to impose. We may offer, we may advise, but then it's the responsibility of others what they do or how they do it or how they lead their lives. And that is what the being does with us. The being persuades us. He advises us. And he also does it with much suffering in case we don't respond to his persuasion. So the being himself suffers. But this is what true love is about. True love is about leaving us free, giving us the freedom to make mistakes and even to enter involution eventually. So in some way the being will always be with us and he will suffer, but that's what love is. It's not tyranny or dictatorship. So we cannot make any particular comments because it is not comprehended in the question. But generally speaking, as an approach, I have clarified that to impose things, it's completely out of order in all social aspects of life. So in Gnosis, even more, because Gnosis should be an example of brotherhood, of persuasion. But concerning the second part of the question, which says in a very strict way or in a very rigid way, what I can say concerning this is that sometimes it is us that are strict. It is us that are rigid. That is our own egos. So each one of us should do an examination of consciousness. Surely even us missionaries make mistakes. But often what happens is that it is the student that understands what us missionaries say in a rigid way, in a strict way, because perhaps it is something that he or she doesn't want to accept, or because it's more comfortable for him to think or to do otherwise. So this is actually an invitation for everybody to do their own self-criticism. Then, of course, if the individual is rigid or strict, whether be it a teacher or a student, each one of us, if we are rigid, if we are strict, then it's another problem. It's another psychological issue, ego. Rigidity is connected to the bad use of the mind, and we've talked about this a bit today, about the fact that the intellect is not the mind. So when one is very intellectual, one cannot use the mind correctly. The mind is a wonderful substance which makes you flexible, that allows you to penetrate in everything through the consciousness. And the consciousness exploits the mind in a good way, in a good sense. Instead, when we are not able to use the mind, then what happens is that the mind is rigid. It has prejudices, preconcepts. It uses the intellect because this mind has made concepts around everything, and therefore it's unmovable. It is intolerant. It can't see other points of view. It cannot expose things in a way that others may comprehend them. It cannot see things from different perspectives. So this emerges from a mental problem that has as its base sexual energy, because at the end, sexual energy is the mind. The mind is a manifestation of sexual energy. It's the result of Mercury, the mercurial mind, the mercurial influence. So it is the base of Mercury, of sexual energy. Whoever transmutes well and a lot, whether be a single or a couple, gradually makes his own mind flexible, moldable, and rigidity disappears. Instead, when transmutation is lacking, then also what happens is that rigidity manifests itself in the mind. Of course, lack of transmutation is also due to the ego of lust. So I believe I have answered to this question. That is, that imposing or being strict or rigid is not a correct approach, not only in who teaches Gnosis, but also in who listens to Gnosis. So this is the same for each one of us. These are psychological aspects that we must eliminate. Okay, so thank you to all the listeners. The radio is not passing any more questions, so I think that is all. Thank you for being with us today. I hope that this may persuade you and not impose anything on anybody, all these kind of reflections that we had. Again, I would like to thank Erin and all the Radio Koradi team.
I also would like to thank the Radio Koradi team and all listeners. We wish you to work all very much for this wonderful Gnostic path, which gives us so many blessings. Thank you all.